You know, very often people ask me what it's like to be a best-selling, world-renowned children's author. They'll wonder how it feels being a member of one of the world's most exclusive clubs. And if for some reason I choose to respond to these people, I always have the same answer, which is that my life really hasn't changed much since the massive success of my book, Johnny the Walrus. Yes, occasionally I'll get some flattering messages from my peer and very good friend, J.K. Rowling, or, an oversized royalty check might arrive in the mail with millions of more dollars in it from my book. And yes, it's true that Amazon once listed Johnny the Walrus as the best-selling book in the LGBTQ plus category, which has endeared me to millions of trans and non-binary folks all over the world. In fact, many of these fans still follow me around to this day, obsessing over my every move. And yes, the book cemented my status as one of the great wordsmiths of our generation, and frankly of all time. I think most people would agree. But really, I don't think of Johnny the Walrus, which is available now at the Daily Wire's online shop, bundled with a walrus plushie on sale for the low price of $29.99, as something that I need to promote or talk about very often. The art speaks for itself in this case, and having freed that particular literary dove and released its brilliance and beauty into the world for everyone to enjoy, I have mostly moved on with my life. But the same cannot be said for people who have made the decision to purchase my book. You might think that in a country with the First Amendment, you can buy any book you want, and you certainly think that you could purchase a book about Johnny, a boy with a very active imagination who dresses up as a walrus. To be clear, the message of the book is pretty simple and straightforward. Johnny isn't actually a walrus, and not to spoil it, and people who try to convince him to undergo walrus-affirming surgery and to eat worms are wrong. We're not talking about a classified bomb-making manual here or an Al-Qaeda guide to hijacking an aircraft. We're also not talking about anything deviant or grotesque or explicit or vulgar or anything like that. We're talking about a children's book about a kid who thinks he's a walrus. So how, you might ask, could this book possibly be controversial in any way? How could anyone who buys this book possibly lose their job or be threatened with termination simply for owning it? Well, enter the Intermountain Education Service District in Oregon, which oversees multiple school districts in the state. And the district currently employs a licensed social worker named Rod Theis, T-H-E-I-S. I might be pronouncing that wrong. Currently, Rod decided to place a copy, Rob decided to place a copy of Johnny the Walrus on his desk in his office. And he also displayed two other books on the windowsill called He is He and She is She. This is an office that says staff only on the door, and students are only inside the office when he's evaluating him as part of his job. And here's what the setup looks like. You can see it there. So the book is not exactly shoved down anybody's throat. It's not plastered all over the wall like the various pro-trans, pro-Pride Month propaganda that pretty much every school in Oregon posts everywhere. It's just a book on his desk. No parent or student complained about the book, as far as anybody knows. Not that they have any reason to do so. But that didn't stop the Intermountain Education Service District from demanding that Rod remove the book from his desk and then suggesting that he attend a mandatory re-education seminar entitled Making Schools Safe and Inclusive for Transgender Students. They said that my story about a little boy who pretends to be a walrus is in fact a hostile expression of animus towards students', quote, actual or perceived gender identity. They claim that the mere presence of this book on the desk constitutes a bias incident. And they said that if Rod didn't comply with their demands, that they would fire him. Now, specifically on October 21st, 2024, the principal of one of these schools in the district emailed Rod to discuss, quote, some concerns brought to the principal about a couple of books on display in your office. In that same email chain, the principal told Rod to place the books out of sight. Quoting from the lawsuit, according to Principal Wagner, the staff member was concerned about messages that could be considered offensive to transgender students. When plaintiff asked why this staff person thought this, Principal Wagner responded that the staff member had looked up the books online and then determined that they were offensive, close quote. So in other words, the staff member who complained didn't actually read the book, and the principal, when he read the book, determined that it wasn't offensive or inappropriate. Nevertheless, the principal told Rod that he had to remove the book because he supposedly has to maintain a neutral environment at the school. Now, by November, there was an official bias complaint from a staffer, and the superintendent, who's a spineless coward named Mark Mulvihill, ruled against Rod. He determined that the book's display, quote, amounted to a bias incident because the books, quote, promote a binary view of gender which excludes and invalidates an understanding of gender diversity. And their display, quote, communicates a message of exclusion and diminishes the validity of non-binary and transgender experiences and contributes to an unwelcoming environment which directly contradicts the district's commitment to inclusivity and diversity. Now, to his great credit, Rod did not back down. He secured representation from the Alliance Defending Freedom, the premier Christian First Amendment advocacy group in the country, which won the Dobbs case that overturned Roe v. Wade before the Supreme Court. And now they've stepped in to defend him. They just filed a First Amendment lawsuit against the district to force them to end their censorship. And in their investigation, ADF determined that various schools in Oregon tolerate books that contain, quote, violence, suicide, explicit language, domestic abuse, drug and alcohol use, and sexual content. And those books include the Twilight Saga, the Hunger Games. There are also books that feature same-sex relationships and non-binary characters, which are on display and available for students to read in sixth grade classrooms. Additionally, some of the books in classrooms that are next to Rod's office contain, quote, sexually inappropriate material, including a book where a boy masturbates, along with books that reference contraceptives and contain descriptions of explicit gore. And even though several parents complained about those books, in that case, the parents did complain, and they didn't complain about my book, still, those books are on display. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with my book, there is no explicit gore in Johnny the Walrus. Neither Johnny nor the Walrus, nor anyone else engage in sexually explicit behavior or domestic abuse or drug or alcohol use. This is a representative page from the book. And as you can see, the characters are having fun, but they're doing it completely sober. There's nothing explicit is being exposed here. But the Intermountain Education Service District has chosen to ban Johnny the Walrus, ostensibly to maintain a neutral environment. And at the same time, ADF found that there's no concern about the left-wing messaging that staffers and teachers are posting throughout other schools in Oregon, including schools outside the district. One special education teacher displays a pride flag, for example, and a counselor has posted various BLM slogans all over the place. But apparently there's no concern in these Oregon schools that any of this messaging might upset, say, a conservative student or disrupt the neutral environment. So why is that? Well, according to the lawsuit, the assistant superintendent of the district, Amy Van Nice, interrogated Rod at one point, and her interrogation gives us a window into the worldview of these people. And apparently the assistant superintendent asked him, and this is verbatim from the lawsuit, quote, why can't Johnny be a walrus? And that about sums up this whole incident, as well as the logic of trans activists more generally. Why can't Johnny be a walrus? It is the perfect encapsulation of how mindless and truly sinister these people are. Johnny can't be a walrus because he's not a walrus. He's a fictional human, not a fictional walrus. My book is intended for children between the ages of 3 and 7, and every single one of them can grasp this concept very quickly. But the middle-aged representatives of this district, who are supposed to serve the interests of taxpayers, are pretending not to understand it. Or maybe they actually don't understand it, which would explain the quality of the education system in this country. Now, at this point, it won't be enough for Rod to win this case. Superintendent Mark Mulvihill, along with the assistant superintendent and HR director Amy Van Nice, need to be fired immediately. The federal government has a responsibility to make sure that any school district that engages in this kind of discrimination is brought to justice, because we're talking about civil rights violations here. The First Amendment, your freedom of speech and religious expression, is a federal issue. It's a fundamental right. The government cannot arbitrarily punish certain viewpoints and reward others. Any school district that suspends the First Amendment or that targets Christians because of their beliefs should lose all federal funding. And the people responsible should never be allowed to teach again. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that any teacher should be able to place any book they want in the classroom or plaster any message they want on the walls. The issue here is, first of all, that they're treating my book differently from all these other books, which is unconstitutional on its face. And the second issue is that my book is sane and reasonable while theirs are pornographic and disturbing. Each one of these issues independently is grounds for Rod to win this case. So we'll be following this lawsuit, and we'll let you know what happens in Oregon. In the meantime, if something like this is happening where you live, get in touch with us or with Alliance Defending Freedom. Conservatives control the federal government, but state and local attacks on constitutional rights appear to be accelerating in many cases. And these people will win unless we fight back. Now, Rod, to his credit, is taking these leftists to court. We'll need a lot more people like him if we're going to preserve the right of every American to read whatever inoffensive children's books they they want, including masterpieces like Johnny the Walrus. And that is why this Oregon district that's threatening to terminate a social worker for reading my book is today canceled.